Croatia is beautiful. Nestled in the Adriatic Sea and swaddled between Slovenia and Bosnia, Croatia contains a vast difference in geography between its east and west sides. However, what I find even more beautiful, because I see with my stomach, is the difference in food from east to west. Today, I'm going to attempt to show that by cooking two different dishes from two different sides of Croatia. Firstly, on the eastern side of Croatia, you'll find a dish called black risotto almost everywhere. Everyone has their own recipe for this, but the one I'm using calls for garlic, olive oil, 2 cuttlefish, onions, white wine or substitute, rice, fish stock, and salt and pepper. The first thing you need to do is cut up the cuttlefish and extract the ink sacs. This is where I ran into my first problem. Once you source cuttlefish ink, move over to a big pan and heat the olive oil until it shimmers. Then add onions and saute until translucent. Add the cuttlefish and wait about 15 minutes. Then add the garlic, parsley, salt, wine, and pepper, and then just enough water to cover the top of the cuttlefish strips. This is where I ran into my second problem. Pulling a mulligan. The cuttlefish won't cook. They're too musky. So I'm heating up this pan. I'm going to slap these in here for 4 minutes and see if that works. Cuttlefish are incredibly muscular, containing pretty much no body fat, and the recipe hadn't told me to sear them beforehand. Luckily, I noticed something was up and quickly checked an old cooking book I had around my house, which recommended searing the meat for about 4 minutes. Once I was done with that, I could move on. Rice. Add the rice and let cook on low heat until the rice absorbs all the water. Then add the fish stock ladle by ladle, letting the rice absorb the water or stock in between. This is where the risotto comes into play. When the Arabs brought rice to the Mediterranean, rice was integrated into the culture there. Risottos are made with special Italian rice and can only be made with this rice. You can get it for like $5 at Walmart, don't worry if you want to make it. Because that rice has the starches that haven't been removed from rice to soak up water. Most of the things, in fact, in this recipe are Italian-based. The coast of Croatia has a very strong Italian influence, as Italians have been sailing over to this beautiful country, specifically the Adriatic coast, for thousands of years. Even now, Italians make up the 4th largest demographic of tourists to the area. I think the dishes served in this area show this. They also show another thing: money. None of the things I cooked with, or originally would have cooked with, are cheap. Perhaps it's just because the nearest body of salt water is some 1,000 miles away from me, but I think it's more the economic class of people who live in the Adriatic coast of Croatia, and especially the economic class of tourists coming to Croatia's coast. Once the risotto has absorbed all of its stock, set it aside for a few minutes and throw in a bit of butter for good measure. Then enjoy this dish that is honestly really unique. I've never had anything like this before, really. It might be because of my lack of gourmet cooking experience, but not only was this risotto a completely new kind of texture, but the cuttlefish was really tasty. I could have made it better, of course. I made 2 pretty bad errors, but the cuttlefish still turned out tender, if not a bit scorched. And then there was the color. I felt like I was eating coal, that's how black it was. I don't know if I'd eat it again. It was really nerve-wracking to cook, but I'd definitely eat all of the individual parts again. Those parts were really good. Deep in the mountains, you're more likely to find something like goulash, or traditional Croatian goulash, in every household. To make goulash, you're going to need beef, onions, garlic, carrots, red wine, mustard, vegetable oil, salt, pepper, paprika, and 2 liters of water. Before you can throw anything into a pot, you need to first marinate the beef with 2 tablespoons of mustard, 1 teaspoon of salt, and a half teaspoon of pepper and red paprika. Let the meat sit in the fridge for an hour, and during that time cut up 3 onions and grate 3 carrots. Hint here, get some big carrots. I got carrots that were way too small. The carrot to onion ratio was completely off. The onions were huge. It was the worst. So get the biggest carrots you physically can if you're gonna make this. Once the meat's done marinating, throw it into a pot with 1 tablespoon of canola oil and brown it on all sides. Then take the meat out and set it on a plate. Add another tablespoon of oil and cook the onions and carrots for 15 minutes. Maybe add some salt in there to make it a little mushy, but really just leave it alone. After 15 minutes, add the meat, garlic, and wine. Let that simmer for another 15 minutes.
Then add some water and let it sit for at least an hour and a half, if not more. Unlike the squid risotto, this goulash is made with incredibly simple ingredients. In fact, you want to use the cheapest stuff you can get. It's really a contrast to the expensive and gourmet stuff I had to buy for the risotto. I drove 30 minutes to get squid ink, and it was the worst drive ever. The other thing that really interested me was the time it took. The risotto took me about 30 minutes of 100% undivided attention from cutting things up to finishing the meal. The goulash, on the other hand, took hours and could have taken longer, but it didn't really need any assistance once it got going. I think it shows the difference in how people move in Eastern versus Western Croatia. In Eastern Croatia, what with the huge tourism industry, things move a lot quicker than quiet, rural Western Croatia. In the West, you can take your time from hour to hour and just throw some stuff in a fridge and then in a pot, and it'll be ready by the end of the day. And when it's ready, well, I have to confess, I messed this recipe up big time. I know, this means I've technically failed both recipes, but cut me some slack here, I am notoriously awful at making soup. The first time I made chicken noodle soup for a friend in middle school, it turned pitch black, and I do not know why. I knew I was gonna mess it up, but I tried my best, and I got really hungry and cooked it on medium heat instead of low heat because I was impatient, which caused the oil to separate and made gray, colorless goop. But what I'm really glad for is that it still tasted amazing. Not in the first moments. I was really hungry and the only thing I noticed was that it burnt the back of my mouth. But when I went to bed, I felt the warmth of the red wine still on my tongue, and I could still taste the carrots and the beef the next morning and felt myself wanting, unlike the risotto, to make it again, and I will. Tonight. I've given myself time. Hopefully it doesn't turn out great. So what have I learned? Well, for starters, I've learned I'm a pretty awful cook, but after that I think that making these dishes showed a few key differences between the east and west sides of Croatia. Firstly, ingredients. On the east side, they have a lot more traditionally gourmet ingredients, and their access to Italy and the Adriatic Sea has given them Italian wine and rice influences, but also large amounts of readily available and fresh seafood. On the other hand, the Baltic influences in West Croatia show more commonplace ingredients from a landlocked area. Secondly, the presentation and format of the dishes shows the economy of their respective areas. The black risotto was really showy, as an all-black risotto made of squid ink should be, for that matter. This lends itself better to the tourism industry on the east side. On the other hand, West Croatia seems to have less tourism, or at least more self-sufficient jobs. This is shown by the fact that goulash, in and of itself, isn't that touristy or exciting. Finally, the time it takes to make each dish shows the format of life around there. In West Croatia, people have to wait a few hours for dinner, but in East Croatia, things run a bit faster. In West Croatia, as long as you're not an idiot, you don't need to watch your food you're making for forever, but the East Croatian cuisine requires all of your attention. I've also learned Croatian food is really good, and Croatia is a really pretty place. Global crisis permitting, I'd love to visit sometime. So hungry.